Yo, what's up guys, Dan here. Today I'm going to share with you this editing technique that I've been using for quite a while now. It takes your photos from looking like this to looking like this. For this you're going to need two editing softwares. I'm going to be editing in Adobe Photoshop and Adobe After Effects. To start with, we're going to need an image. So for a beginner using this technique, we're going to be wanting to look for an image with a very clear, unobstructed central subject. The more advanced you get with this technique, the more complicated the images you can use. For this example, we're going to use this photo, which I took of While She Sleeps during their headline set at Alexandra Palace in London last year. And as you can see here, we have a very clear frontal subject, which is Loz flipping the bird at the camera. We have a nice mid-ground, which is the staging and the monitors and the riser. And then the background is the crowd and the backdrop of the venue. Firstly, we're going to start with Photoshop, so we're going to drop our photo in. I like to set up my files at 300 dpi for this, but I just find this works the best. Next, we are going to want to cut out our layers. I like to bundle these into three different areas. Firstly, we have our foreground, which in this case is Loz. Secondly, we have our mid-ground, which is the stage in itself, the riser and the monitors. And finally, we have the background, which is the crowd and the backdrop of the venue. What you can also see is that when I am showing and hiding these layers, is that there's actually information behind these layers too. And that's because as we're moving around in 3D space, we're going to be able to see a little bit behind the subject and behind the midground. Luckily, nowadays, it is a lot easier to be able to do this from when I first started using this technique, and I like to use generative fill to be able to achieve it. On one layer, when I cut out a subject, so say like here we have cut out Loz. On the next layer down from that, I will make a selection of Loz, and I will select generative fill with no prompt in there, and it should generate something behind him. Hopefully some of that made sense. Now that we have all of our layers cut and we have them placed in order of foreground from the top to then midground layers and then background as the final layer, we'll then save this out as a PSD, and next we want to open up After Effects. We're just going to straight up drop the PSD file into After Effects, which will then show up this dialog box. On import kind, you want to select composition retain layer sizes, and on layer options you want to select editable layer styles. Click OK, and you'll notice that it has now created a composition within your project bin. Next, we want to create a new composition. So within the project bin, we will right click and select new composition. Here you will input the information of the frames per second and size of the video that you're wanting to create. In this case, it's for social media, so we're going to do it at HD in vertical, so that's 1080 width by 1920 height, and the video is going to be 30 frames a second. Once we've created this composition, we're going to drag the PSD composition into that timeline, and you'll see here it's a little bit zoomed in, so we want to select S for scale and just dial it back so that it fills the screen properly. Now we double click on the composition and it will take us into our layered PSD file. If we hide and show the layers here, you can see that everything has imported correctly. Next, we want to go down to our layers and select the checkbox on all of the 3D layers and also all of the motion blur checkboxes. And to make things easier for ourselves, we're going to create a top-down view. So we'll go to the bottom right hand corner of the viewer window, select where it says one view and select two views. And then on the second viewer, we want to select top, so we have a top down view of the 3D space. Now we're going to be using the Z axis to be able to distribute our layers at different depths within the scene. Obviously you would want your foreground right at the forefront of the image, and then any mid-ground information, and then you want your background all the way to the back. So on the top down view, we're going to select the Z axis, which is the blue arrow, and we're going to drag towards and push away from the central point to be able to layer our files. We're going to move Loz a little bit closer to ourselves, leave the staging exactly where it is, but we'll select our riser and the monitors just to come forward a little bit for a bit more depth. And then we're going to push our background back a little bit further. As you can see, we've got a little bit of a black border here around our background, so we want to expand that a little bit. So again, we select S for scale and we just blow it up a little bit just to fill the gaps. Next, we want to go down into our layers, right click, select new and camera. Generally, I leave the settings where they are, so just click OK. And on the camera layer, you want to click the drop down icon and then also drop down camera options. Turn depth of field on, and then using the Z axis again, we want to pull the camera back so that it is in line with our foreground. This means that our foreground will be the first thing that is in focus, with everything else gradually becoming more out of focus. Once we've done that, we're going to crank our aperture up to a higher number, and that will create more of that depth of field look. We'll get that to a point of where we like it, and then again, as you can see, we've got a lot of that black border, so we will use the zoom function to just punch in a little bit more. Next, back into the drop down section of the camera, you want to drop down transform and camera options, and then we're creating a keyframe for point of interest, position, orientation, X rotation, Y rotation, Z rotation, zoom, and focus distance. These keyframes are our starting point, and I like to make these videos loop. And what I'm looking to do is for the camera to zoom out from a point, it goes through the motions of the video, and then at the end of the video, it zooms back into a similar source. That when it replays on social media, it's a seamless loop. We'll drag these keyframes over, and then staying at the beginning of the video, we will use the different axes on the top-down view to drag the camera around to zoom right into the background. Select the rest of the keyframes, and then as you can see, we have this zoom out blurred effect. The trick to this effect is always keeping the camera moving. We'll move a little bit further along in the timeline just a few seconds later, and again using the axes on the top-down view of the camera, we'll move it around the scene to a desired location. Make sure to really utilize the different axes of the camera to achieve the best 3D look. And you'll see that every move that we make within the top-down view, it will create a new keyframe within our timeline. Again, we select a new keyframe for all the other selections that haven't been adjusted, and then we make our next movement. So when we zoom into our foreground, you'll notice that it starts to get blurry. This line here depicts exactly where your focusing point is within your camera's focus distance, and we want it to line up with the line of where our foreground subject is. So on the focus distance slider, we will adjust that so that that line lines up exactly with the exact same level of where our foreground layer is. And there we go. You see that it perfectly lines up, and now our foreground is back in focus and our background is out of focus. Now for the rest of the video, you want to make all of your different movements, your zooms, your zoom outs, and then when it gets right to the end, to create that looping look, you want to zoom straight back into the background. And at the end of all this, you want to select all of your keyframes, right click, and select Easy Ease. This just makes sure that all of our movements are nice and fluid. Basically, we have the video here, but we do have a few more steps to complete. So if we click back into our original composition, just drag your selection slider over to the point of where your video finishes, select File, Export, and Add to Render Queue. I just leave the settings as is, select where I want to save my file, and click Render. And now we have the final video. You can also go a little bit more in depth with the effects like I have with this version, where it's creating exposure adjustments in the background to replicate lighting changes. I've got a few bits of dust particles and a little bit of haze moving around the screen. It just makes it that little bit more interesting and creates a little bit more depth. I hope you understand any of the gibberish that I've just spoken. If you got any value from this video, please leave a like. If you have any tips or tricks that you'd like to know, let me know in the comments below. Subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.